"They said you wouldn't last 3 days up here," the driver muttered, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as the gravel road dissolved into mud. "Liam's a ghost of a man. Those kids are feral. Turn back, lady. Nobody expects you to survive this." Olivia stared through the rain-streaked windshield at the imposing log cabin looming in the mist. On the porch stood a man with eyes like winter ice, his jaw tight, a splitting axe resting casually against his boot. "I didn't ask the agency for a replacement." Liam's voice cut through the howling wind as she stepped out of the truck. Olivia didn't flinch. She gripped her single duffel bag, her voice steady. "I'm not a replacement, Liam. I'm survival. And my truck just left." The taillights of the agency's transport truck bled into the heavy mountain fog, leaving Olivia standing in a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. The air up here at the ridge of the Bitterroot Valley was thin, biting with the sharp scent of crushed pine needles and impending frost. She stood at the base of the wooden stairs, the mud already working its way up the leather of her boots. Above her, on the wraparound porch of the sprawling, shadowed cabin, Liam remained entirely still. He was a tall man, built like the mountains he inhabited, broad, weathered, and immovable. His dark flannel shirt was rolled at the sleeves, revealing forearms corded with tension. But it was his eyes that caught her. They were a fractured, storm-tossed gray, radiating a hostility born not of malice, but of deep, unhealed exhaustion. "The contract is signed," Olivia said, her voice carrying over the low whistle of the wind. She kept her tone neutral, devoid of the pity she knew he had likely drowned in for the past 2 years. Liam slowly lifted his chin. "Contracts don't mean a damn thing at 7,000 feet. I told the county I needed a farmhand. They sent a nanny. I don't need a mother for my children. They have one. She's just not here." The absolute finality in his words was designed to shatter her. It had likely shattered the 3 women who had attempted this placement before her. But Olivia merely adjusted the strap of her duffel bag. A faint, silvery scar ran across the back of her left hand, catching the gray light, a silent testament to a life that had taught her how to stand her ground. "I'm not here to mother them," Olivia replied, taking the first step up the wooden stairs. The boards groaned under her weight. "I'm here to make sure they eat something other than canned beans, that the firewood is chopped before the blizzard hits, and that the state doesn't come up here and take them away because you're too busy mourning to notice they're freezing." Liam's jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. His hand tightened around the handle of the axe leaning against the railing. For a long, terrifying second, the tension hummed in the air between them, sharp enough to draw blood. He stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the front door. "You don't know the first thing about us," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "Then show me." Before Liam could issue another rejection, a sound caught Olivia's attention. Behind the heavy screen door, 3 faces materialized from the gloom of the unlit hallway. The eldest, a boy of about 12, had Liam's dark hair and a defensive, aggressive slouch. He stood protectively in front of a younger girl, maybe 8, whose tangled blonde hair looked as though it hadn't seen a brush in months. Peeking from behind the girl's legs was a boy no older than 5, clutching a ragged, dirt-stained blanket to his chest. His wide, terrified eyes were fixed on Olivia. They didn't look like children. They looked like survivors of a shipwreck, marooned in their own home. Olivia didn't smile. She didn't offer a sweet, condescending greeting. She simply nodded at them. "I'm Olivia," she said, addressing the children directly, bypassing Liam entirely. "I'm taking the room off the kitchen. I expect the oldest to show me where the well pump is in 20 minutes. She stepped forward, forcing Liam to make a choice. Physically lay hands on her to stop her, or step aside. For an agonizing heartbeat, he held his ground. The air crackled. Then, with a heavy, defeated exhale that seemed to drain the life from him, Liam shifted his shoulder just enough for her to pass. "You won't last the week," Liam murmured as she brushed past him, the scent of sawdust and cold rain clinging to him. "We'll see," Olivia whispered back. She pushed open the screen door, stepping out of the harsh mountain wind and into the stifling, silent grief of the house. The threshold was crossed. The real war she knew was just beginning. The inside of the cabin was a monument to a life that had violently stopped. Dust motes danced in the pale shafts of afternoon light, settling on stacks of unopened mail, unwashed laundry, and a beautiful, silent, upright piano in the corner. The kitchen sink was a precarious mountain of dishes. The air smelled stale, a mixture of old grease and wood smoke. Olivia dropped her duffel in the small Spartan room off the kitchen. She didn't unpack. Instead, she tied her hair back, rolled up her sleeves, and walked back to the kitchen. She didn't attempt a miraculous, sweeping cleanse. That would be an invasion. Instead, she started with the practical. She boiled water on the ancient gas stove, finding a rhythm in the mundane task of scrubbing plates. An hour later, a shadow fell across the kitchen floor. It was the 12-year-old. Leo. He stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, his eyes dark with a defensive fury that mirrored his father's. "You're using her mug," he said. The words were quiet, but they struck like a thrown stone. Olivia paused, the soapy sponge hovering over a heavy ceramic mug with a faded blue glaze. She looked from the mug to the boy. She could see the trembling in his rigid posture. This wasn't about the mug. It was about the erasure of memory. "I apologize," Olivia said smoothly, immediately rinsing the mug and setting it carefully on the highest shelf, away from the active dishes. "I didn't know. Which ones are safe to use?" Leo blinked, thrown off balance. He had expected an argument, or perhaps an empty, patronizing apology. He hadn't expected immediate compliance and a logical follow-up question. The plastic ones, and the white bowls." "Understood." Olivia turned back to the sink. "Your father is still outside. The younger ones are in the living room. Where is the flour?" "Pantry, second shelf," Leo mumbled, lingering in the doorway a moment longer before retreating. Dinner was a masterclass in suffocating tension. Liam sat at the head of the heavy oak table, staring at his plate of roasted chicken and root vegetables as if it were an insult. The 8-year-old Maya kicked the table leg rhythmically, refusing to eat. The youngest, Sam, hid beneath the table, whining softly. "Maya, please stop kicking the table," Liam said, his voice flat, devoid of energy. Maya kicked harder. Liam closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Maya, stop!" The girl's face twisted into a defiant scowl. She reached for her glass of water and, maintaining unbroken eye contact with Olivia, deliberately tipped it over. The water cascaded across the wood, dripping onto Olivia's lap. Silence slammed into the room. Liam's eyes snapped open, a flash of exhausted anger crossing his features. Leo braced himself, waiting for the inevitable yelling, the tears, the dramatic exit that previous caretakers had performed. Olivia didn't shout. She didn't look at Liam for backup. She calmly picked up her napkin, absorbed the water on her jeans, and then stood up. She walked to the kitchen, retrieved a heavy dish towel, and placed it on the table in front of Maya. "Wipe it up," Olivia said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. It wasn't a request. Maya's lip quivered. She looked at her father. Liam remained frozen, watching Olivia with a guarded, unreadable expression. "I'm not your maid, Maya," Olivia continued, leaning down slightly so she was at the girl's eye level. "You made the mess. You clean it. Then you can be excused." Tears welled in the girl's eyes, manipulative, testing tears. When they yielded no reaction from the stony-faced woman before her, the tears dried up. With a huff of pure outrage, Maya snatched the towel, aggressively swiped at the water, threw the wet cloth on the floor, and bolted from the room. Sam whimpered from beneath the table. Olivia calmly reached down with a piece of chicken on a fork. A small, dirty hand darted out from the shadows, snatched the meat, and vanished back into the darkness. Olivia sat back down and resumed eating. She could feel Liam staring at her. The animosity in his gaze had shifted, fractured by a sliver of bewildered curiosity. "She's grieving," Liam said, his voice thick, a defensive shield for his daughter. "I know," Olivia replied, not looking up from her plate. "But grief isn't an excuse to be cruel, and pity won't help her survive the winter." By the end of the first week, the silence in the cabin had changed. It was no longer the heavy, stagnant silence of decay, but the cautious, humming silence of observation. The dishes were clean. The woodpile was stacked high against the encroaching frost. The children were still feral, still distant, but they had stopped setting deliberate traps for her. Friday was supply day. The valley town of Oak Haven lay 40 minutes down the treacherous mountain switchbacks. It was a town that thrived on logging, harsh winters, and gossip. And the favorite topic of the week was Liam Thorne's new agency hire. When Liam's battered Ford truck pulled into the gravel lot of Miller's General Store, heads turned. 3 older men sitting on the porch abruptly stopped talking, their eyes tracking the vehicle. $20 says she's already crying in the passenger seat, muttered Jim, the town's mechanic, spitting a sunflower seed into the dirt. Nobody lasts a week with Liam acting the way he does. Man's a walking graveyard. The driver's side door groaned open, and Liam stepped out. He looked exactly as he always did, hollowed out, beard untrimmed, eyes fixed firmly on the ground. Then, the passenger door opened. The townsfolk paused. Olivia stepped out into the crisp mountain air. She wasn't weeping. She wasn't carrying her bags. She wore a heavy canvas jacket, her hair braided tightly down her back, and she held a clipboard. She looked up, her gaze sweeping over the men on the porch with a piercing, analytical coolness that made Jim instinctively sit up straighter. She walked around the truck, opening the back door. Maya and Leo slid out, their usual scowls in place, while Olivia reached in and effortlessly hoisted 5-year-old Sam onto her hip. Sam, who usually screamed if anyone but his siblings touched him, simply buried his face in Olivia's collar, clutching her jacket. A collective silent shock rippled through the onlookers. Inside the store, the tension was palpable. Mrs. Gable, the town busybody who ran the registers, watched like a hawk as Olivia navigated the aisles. Liam was in the back, loading feed sacks, leaving Olivia to manage the groceries. As Olivia approached the counter, juggling Sam and a basket of produce, a burly logger named Tucker deliberately stepped into her path. Tucker had been sour since Liam had refused to sell him a strip of timber a year ago. "Well, look here," Tucker drawled, loud enough for the whole store to hear. "Thorne finally hired someone to do his parenting for him. How long until he drives you crazy, sweetheart? Must be hard, working for a man who doesn't even care his kids are turning into wild animals." The store went dead silent. In the back aisle, the heavy thud of a feed sack hitting the floor echoed. Liam had heard. He stepped out from behind the shelving, his fists clenched, his face dark with a lethal, rising fury. He looked ready to tear Tucker apart. But before Liam could take a step, Olivia moved. She didn't raise her voice. She simply shifted her weight, locking eyes with Tucker. "I suggest," Olivia said, her voice dropping a terrifying octave, "you step aside." Tucker smirked. "Or what, little lady?" Olivia took one step closer, invading his personal space. Her eyes were dead, devoid of any intimidation or fear. Just cold, hard fact. "Or I will calculate exactly how much it will cost to fix your shattered jaw, deduct it from my supply budget, and pay Jim outside in advance to tow your truck while you're in the hospital. Liam's children are grieving, not wild, and Liam is a man holding up the sky for them. What exactly are you holding up, other than the line?" The absolute conviction in her voice stripped the smirk from Tucker's face. He looked at her eyes, saw the faint, jagged scar on her hand, and realized with a sudden jolt of instinct that she was not bluffing. She wasn't a frightened nanny. She was something else entirely. Tucker swallowed hard, stepping back. Olivia turned smoothly to Mrs. Gable, acting as if nothing had happened. "Put this on the Thorne account, please." In the back of the store, Liam stood frozen. He stared at Olivia's back, the rigid line of her shoulders. For the first time in 2 years, the icy fog of his grief cracked, letting in a blinding, confusing ray of awe. The entire valley had expected her to break. Instead, in her first week, she had just drawn a line in the dirt and dared the world to cross it. Dawn in the Bitterroot Valley did not arrive with warmth. It bled over the jagged peaks like a bruised plum, casting long skeletal shadows across the frost-heaved yard. Olivia stood by the kitchen window, a steaming mug of black coffee warming her hands. She watched Liam. He was already at the woodpile, a massive, solitary figure in the gray light. He swung the heavy splitting maul with a rhythmic, punishing violence. Thwack, crack. The sharp reports echoed off the canyon walls. He wasn't just chopping wood to prepare for the winter. He was exorcising ghosts. Every swing was an apology to a wife he couldn't save, a punishment for still being alive to breathe the freezing air. Olivia recognized the movement. It was the frantic, exhausting choreography of a survivor trying to outrun their own mind. Setting her mug down, she pulled on her heavy canvas coat, grabbed a pair of thick leather work gloves, and stepped out onto the back porch. The cold air hit her lungs like swallowed glass. She walked across the frozen mud, her boots crunching loudly, but Liam didn't stop. He was oblivious to the world, sweat freezing in the scruff of his jaw as he hoisted a massive round of stubborn, knotted oak onto the splitting block. He swung. The maul bit into the wood with a dull thud, burying itself halfway. The oak refused to split. Liam grunted, wrestling the handle, his boots slipping in the mud as he tried to free the embedded steel. "You're fighting the grain, not the wood," Olivia said, her voice cutting through the heavy mist. Liam froze. He turned, his chest heaving, his gray eyes flashing with territorial annoyance. "I didn't ask for an audience. Go back inside. It's below freezing." "The children are still asleep," Olivia replied, stepping into the perimeter of the woodpile. She didn't retreat from his glare. "And that maul is dull. You're using your lower back to pry it loose. You keep doing that. You'll blow a disc by November, and then who chops the wood?" Liam's jaw tightened. "I've been doing this since before you were born. Doing something wrong for a long time doesn't make it right," she countered smoothly. Before he could argue, Olivia stepped up to the block. She didn't try to pull the maul out by the handle. Instead, she picked up a heavy, steel splitting wedge from the dirt. She grabbed a 4-pound sledgehammer resting against a nearby stump. "Move," she ordered. Liam narrowed his eyes, but a flicker of morbid curiosity made him step back. He expected her to miss, to bounce the hammer off the steel and jar her wrists. Olivia didn't hesitate. She planted her feet, aligned her shoulders, and brought the sledgehammer down in a flawless, fluid arc. Clang. The wedge drove deep into the fissure of the oak round. She didn't stop to admire her work. She immediately brought the hammer around again, utilizing the kinetic energy of her hips rather than her arms. Clang. Crack. The stubborn oak violently surrendered, splitting into 2 perfect halves and freeing Liam's trapped maul. Olivia casually tossed the sledgehammer back into the dirt, her breathing barely elevated. She pulled off one leather glove, revealing the silvery scar on her hand, and picked up a piece of the split wood, inspecting the clean break. Liam stared at her. The silence between them was suddenly thick, vibrating with unasked questions. Women from the agency didn't know how to read the grain of knotted oak. They didn't swing a 4-pound sledge with the lethal precision of a seasoned lumberjack. "Where did you learn to do that?" Liam asked, his voice dropping, the hostility replaced by a heavy, wary scrutiny. "Places where being weak wasn't an option," Olivia said quietly. She looked up, meeting his storm-tossed gaze. "You're strong, Liam, but you're swinging from anger. Anger burns out. Technique keeps you alive." From the shadows of the barn, a small movement caught her eye. Leo was standing just inside the threshold, watching them. His eyes were wide, taking in the sight of this strange woman effortlessly commanding the yard. Olivia didn't smile at the boy. She simply pointed to the scattered wood. "Leo," she called out. "If you're going to spy, you might as well make yourself useful. Come stack these, bark facing up so the snow doesn't rot the grain." For a moment, Leo looked like he was going to bolt. He looked at his father for permission to rebel. But Liam was still staring at Olivia, his chest rising and falling slowly. "Do what she says, Leo," Liam murmured softly, never taking his eyes off Olivia. As Leo grudgingly trudged over to begin stacking, Olivia turned on her heel and walked back toward the cabin. Behind her, she could feel the weight of Liam's stare pressing into her spine, a profound and terrifying shift in the tectonic plates of their isolated world. The weather didn't turn, it shattered. By 3 o'clock the following Tuesday, the sky over the Bitterroot Ridge plummeted from a pale, bruised violet to absolute, suffocating black. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in less than an hour. The wind howled down the canyon walls, carrying a blinding horizontal sheet of ice and snow. It was a flash blizzard, brutal and unforgiving. Inside the cabin, the heavy log walls groaned under the assault. Olivia was in the kitchen, lighting kerosene lanterns as the erratic power grid finally surrendered with a dying whine of the refrigerator. Suddenly, the front door violently blew open, slamming against the interior wall. Liam stood in the doorway, coated in a thick layer of ice, his eyes wide with a frantic, desperate energy. "The main line to the lower pasture trough just blew," he shouted over the roar of the wind. "The pump is still running. If I don't cap it and drain the line, the water will freeze back up the pipe and shatter the well manifold. We'll have no water for the winter." Olivia didn't gasp. She didn't ask questions. She instantly slammed the lantern down. "What do you need?" "A pipe wrench, the blowtorch, and someone to hold the line steady while I thread the cap," he yelled, already grabbing gear from the hallway closet. "But I can't leave the kids." "I'll come," Olivia said, shoving her arms into her heavy canvas coat. "No, you'll freeze to death out there in 10 minutes. You don't understand the—" "Liam!" Olivia barked, her voice cracking like a whip. "You need a second set of hands, now!" Before he could argue, a terrified scream tore through the cabin. Maya came sprinting from the living room, her hands clamped over her ears, tears streaming down her face. The wind howling down the chimney sounded like a dying animal. Sam was right behind her, sobbing hysterically, clutching the door frame. "Daddy!" Maya shrieked, throwing her arms around Liam's icy legs. "Don't go out! Mommy went out in the snow and she didn't come back! Don't go!" The words struck Liam like a physical blow. He froze, his face draining of color, the heavy wrench in his hand trembling. The trauma of the past paralyzed him in the present. He looked down at his daughter, completely broken, unable to move, unable to speak. The well was about to shatter, but he was drowning in the memory of his wife's fatal car accident in a storm just like this. Olivia saw the paralysis. She saw the man breaking. She dropped to her knees, instantly putting herself between Liam and Maya. She gripped Maya's shoulders firmly, not to comfort, but to ground her. "Maya, look at me," Olivia commanded, her voice vibrating with a calm, terrifying authority that cut straight through the child's panic. Maya blinked, gasping for air. "Your father is not leaving. He is fixing the water so you can drink tomorrow. He is coming right back through that door. Do you understand?" "Do." Maya whimpered, shaking her head. "No, the snow takes people." "The snow is just frozen water, Maya," Olivia said, leaning in, her eyes locking onto the little girl's with an unshakable intensity. "It doesn't take people. It doesn't have a mind. It is a puzzle, and your father knows how to solve it. But I need you to be brave for Sam. Can you do that? Can you hold your brother?" The sheer force of Olivia's certainty acted like a physical anchor. Maya's hyperventilation slowed. She looked at Olivia's unblinking eyes, then over at her crying little brother. Slowly, Maya nodded. Olivia stood up and looked at Liam. The spell of his panic was broken. He was breathing again. "Go," Olivia told him, her voice low. "Cap the line. I'll secure the house and the kids. I'll watch from the window. If you aren't back in 15 minutes, I'm coming after you. Go." Liam stared at her, a profound look of shock and overwhelming gratitude flashing across his face. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive motion, and plunged back out into the screaming white abyss, pulling the heavy door shut behind him. Olivia immediately turned to the children. She didn't coddle them. She gave them a job. "Leo," she called into the shadows. The boy emerged, looking pale. "Get blankets. Maya, sit on the rug with Sam. We are going to build a fort, and we are going to wait." 14 minutes later, the door handle turned. Liam practically fell into the hallway, covered in ice, shivering violently, but victorious. He looked up from the floor, his chest heaving. In the center of the living room, illuminated by the golden glow of a single kerosene lantern. His 3 children were huddled beneath a massive quilt fortress. They weren't crying. They were quiet, safe, and watching Olivia, who was calmly peeling an apple with a pocket knife. Liam slumped against the wall, sliding down to the floor. He closed his eyes, the roar of the storm outside fading into the background, eclipsed by the sudden, overwhelming realization that his home had just been saved by a stranger. The blizzard raged for hours, entombing the cabin in a fortress of snow. But inside, the panic had subsided into an exhausted, heavy stillness. The children, drained by the adrenaline of the afternoon, had fallen deeply asleep on the heavy rugs dragged close to the stone hearth of the fireplace. The only light in the great room came from the snapping flames. The grid was still completely dead. Olivia sat on the edge of the leather sofa, a heavy wool blanket draped over her shoulders. She was staring into the fire, her profile illuminated by the flickering orange light. A floorboard creaked. Liam emerged from the kitchen shadows. He had changed into dry clothes, his hair still damp from the melted snow. In one hand, he carried a bottle of amber bourbon. In the other, 2 heavy crystal tumblers. He didn't ask if she wanted one. He simply walked over to the low wooden coffee table, set the glasses down, and poured a generous measure into each. He handed one to Olivia. "To the well," Liam said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp in the quiet room. "To the well," Olivia murmured. She took the glass. Their fingers brushed for a fraction of a second, a fleeting contact that felt jarringly loud in the silent, dark room. Liam sat in the heavy armchair across from her. He took a long, slow swallow of the bourbon, letting the burn ground him. He watched her for a long time. The hostility that had defined his gaze for the past week was gone, replaced by a deep, cautious examination. "You handled Maya today," Liam finally said, staring at his glass. "When I couldn't, you didn't coddle her. You snapped her out of it. Fear is a spiral," Olivia said quietly, keeping her eyes on the fire. "If you try to catch someone while they're falling down it, they pull you in with them. You have to give them a ledge to stand on." Liam leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. The firelight caught the silver threads in his dark beard. "Who gives you your ledge, Olivia?" She took a slow sip of the bourbon. It burned a path down her throat, but her expression remained completely impassive. "I built my own." "You're not a nanny," Liam stated. It wasn't a question. "Mrs. Gable at the store called the agency after you threatened Tucker. She has a big mouth. The agency told her you had pristine references, but they wouldn't say from where. Just that you were highly specialized." Olivia remained silent. The logs in the hearth shifted, sending a shower of golden sparks up the chimney. "Tucker is an idiot," Liam continued, his voice dropping into a register that was far too intimate. "But he's a massive idiot. You stepped into his space like you were calculating exactly how many seconds it would take to drop him. Just like you swung that sledgehammer. You didn't flinch today when the storm hit. You just evaluated the threat." Liam set his glass down. He looked at her left hand, resting on her knee. The firelight illuminated the jagged silvery scar that ran from her knuckles to her wrist. "What happened to your hand?" he asked softly. Olivia's thumb lightly traced the edge of the scar. She didn't look at him. "A mistake, a reminder that no matter how much you plan, the variables always change. You managed people in high-stress environments," Liam said, quoting the fragmented piece of truth she had let slip in the store. He leaned closer. "Military? Private security? Something like that." Olivia finally looked at him. Her eyes, usually so guarded, held a flicker of immense, ancient exhaustion. A look Liam recognized intimately. It was the look he saw in the mirror every morning. Liam held her gaze. The space between them seemed to shrink, pulling taut. "I was looking through the agency paperwork yesterday," he said, his voice barely a whisper over the crackling fire. "The placement forms. I didn't care enough to read them when they sent them over last week." Olivia's posture instantly went rigid. The subtle shift didn't escape Liam. "The agency didn't assign you to this county, Olivia," Liam said, his eyes narrowing as the final puzzle piece clicked into place. "You requested it. You requested the Bitterroot Valley, and you specifically requested my family. The application date was 3 months ago. The silence that followed was deafening. The wind howled outside, beating against the thick glass of the windows. But inside, all the air had been sucked from the room. Olivia stared at him, the mask of cold detachment finally slipping just a fraction, revealing something fierce and deeply hidden beneath. "Why, Olivia?" Liam asked, his voice thick with a sudden rising tension. "Why did you hunt us down?" The silence in the room stretched until it felt like the log beams above them might splinter from the pressure. Outside, the blizzard shrieked, throwing violent gusts of snow against the frosted panes. But inside, the crackle of the hearth seemed deafening. Liam did not move. He remained leaning forward, the amber liquid in his glass perfectly still, his storm-gray eyes locked onto Olivia's face. He was a man suspended over a chasm, waiting for the rope to snap. "I asked you a question, Olivia," Liam said, his voice dropping into a ragged, dangerous register. "Why did you hunt us down?" Olivia didn't flinch, nor did she look away. She slowly lowered her glass to the coffee table, the crystal making a soft clink against the wood. She looked at the 3 sleeping children huddled on the rug, their breathing deep and rhythmic, oblivious to the seismic shift happening inches away from them. "I didn't hunt you down," Olivia began, her voice steady, though a tremor of long-buried fatigue laced the edges of her words. "I followed a debt." Liam frowned, his brow furrowing. "A debt? I don't owe anyone anything. The agency is paid. Not a financial one." Olivia looked down at her left hand, her thumb once again finding the jagged, silvery ridge of the scar. She took a slow, deliberate breath. 2 years ago, in November, a storm exactly like this one hit the valley. I wasn't working in domestic placement back then. I was a lead medic for the county's high-altitude search and rescue team. The air left Liam's lungs in a sudden, sharp hiss. His posture, previously aggressive, instantly collapsed into rigid horror. The color drained from his face, leaving him as gray as the ash in the hearth. He knew the storm she meant. It was the only storm that mattered. "You..." Liam choked out, the glass in his hand trembling violently. "You were on the mountain that night." "I was in the lead chopper," Olivia confirmed, her eyes finally lifting to meet his. The cold detachment she wore like armor had vanished, replaced by a profound, agonizing sorrow. When the call came in about an SUV slipping off the embankment on Route 93, we deployed immediately. But the whiteout was blinding. We couldn't land. I had to rappel down into the ravine. Liam closed his eyes. A ragged, tortured breath shuddered through his chest. He had read the police reports, the coroner's summary, but he had never spoken to the people who were actually in the snow. He had refused to. It was too agonizing. The vehicle was suspended in a cluster of old-growth pines, Olivia continued softly, stepping back into the nightmare she had relived every night for 24 months. The winch line slipped in the ice as I was trying to access the driver's side. The windshield shattered. That's how I got the scar. She flexed her hand. It cut straight through my insulated glove, but I got inside. Liam's eyes snapped open. They were rimmed with red, shining with unshed tears. "You were with her." It wasn't a question. It was a desperate, grasping realization. "I was with her," Olivia said. "She was trapped. The dash had pinned her, and the internal bleeding. It was too severe for a field extraction. I stabilized her as best I could. I gave her morphine. I held her hand, Liam." A single tear broke free and tracked down Liam's weathered cheek, disappearing into his beard. He didn't wipe it away. Was she afraid?" "No," Olivia said, her voice dropping to a fierce, adamant whisper. "She wasn't afraid. She was furious. She was fighting, but not for herself." Olivia paused, swallowing the lump of ash in her own throat. She knew she wasn't making it off that mountain, but in those final 20 minutes, she didn't talk about the pain. She talked about a man who was going to break into a million pieces. She talked about a boy who needed to learn how to fix an engine, a girl who needed her hair braided, and a baby who still needed the nightlight left on. Liam let out a low, gut-wrenching sound. A sob that had been trapped in his chest for 2 years. He buried his face in his hands, the crystal glass tumbling from his grip and rolling across the rug, staining the wool with bourbon. Olivia leaned forward, her voice cutting through his grief like a lifeline. Her last words, Liam, her very last words were to me. She gripped my hand so hard it bruised. She said, "Tell him not to let the cold in. Tell him to keep the fire going." Liam wept. It was a silent, agonizing breaking of a man who had held the sky up for too long. "I relayed the message to the police," Olivia said quietly. "But I watched you from afar. I watched you fire caretaker after caretaker. I watched the cold getting in. The state was building a file on you, Liam. They were going to cite you for neglect by the end of the year. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't do my job. So I quit search and rescue. I forged a domestic placement resume, called in every favor I had with the state, and I made sure they assigned me here." Liam slowly lowered his hands. His face was ravaged, his eyes entirely bare. He looked at Olivia, really looked at her, seeing past the stern disciplinarian, past the capable farmhand. He saw a woman who had taken his wife's dying plea as a sacred vow, sacrificing her own peace to pull his family back from the edge of the abyss. "You came to save us," Liam whispered, the realization crashing over him with the weight of an avalanche. "I came to keep the fire going," Olivia corrected softly, looking toward the hearth. "But you have to be the one to tend it, Liam, because I can't stay forever." The morning arrived with a blinding, diamond-sharp brilliance. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a frozen, silent world entombed in 3 feet of pristine, white snow. The sky was an impossible, aching blue. Inside the cabin, the heavy emotional atmosphere of the previous night had settled into something entirely new. It wasn't resolved. Grief of that magnitude never vanished overnight. But the crushing, suffocating tension was gone. The air felt breathable. Olivia was already in the kitchen, dressed in her heavy canvas coat and boots, brewing coffee on the camp stove. She turned as the floorboards creaked. Liam stood in the doorway. He looked exhausted, his eyes bruised with fatigue, but the hostile defensive armor he had worn since the day she arrived was entirely stripped away. He looked lighter. He looked like a man who had finally put down a burden he had carried for thousands of miles. He didn't say good morning. He simply walked over to the counter, picked up 2 mugs, and held them out to her. It was a peace offering, a surrender. Olivia poured the coffee. "The snowdrift is blocking the main barn doors," she said, keeping her tone practical, though the space between them hummed with a new quiet intimacy. "We'll need to dig out the side entrance to get feed to the horses. I'll start on the drift," Liam said, his voice a low, steady rumble. He took a sip of the coffee, his eyes lingering on her face for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "Thank you. For the coffee, and for last night. We had to clear the air," Olivia replied gently. "The real work starts today." The physical labor of digging out the farm was punishing, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a solitary punishment for Liam. He and Olivia worked in tandem. The rhythmic scrape of their metal shovels against the ice formed a strange, percussive harmony in the silent valley. Around noon, the front door of the cabin opened. Leo stepped out onto the porch, bundled in a heavy parka, his breath pluming in the freezing air. He stood for a moment, watching his father and Olivia working side by side. The boy's usual defensive scowl was absent, replaced by a cautious curiosity. To Liam's utter shock, Leo didn't retreat inside. He walked down the swept stairs, picked up a smaller snow shovel leaning against the railing, and waded into the trench they were carving toward the barn. He didn't speak to his father. He stopped next to Olivia, sinking his shovel into the heavy snowpack. "You're lifting with your back again," Leo muttered, not looking at her. A perfect mimicry of Olivia's own tone from the woodpile days ago. "You're gonna pull a muscle." Olivia paused, resting her gloved hands on the handle of her shovel. A faint, genuine smile, the first Liam had ever seen her wear, touched the corners of her mouth. It transformed her face entirely. softening the hard edges and revealing a breathtaking warmth beneath. "Is that right?" Olivia asked, her eyes sparkling with quiet amusement. "And how do you suggest I lift, Leo?" "Legs," the boy grunted, demonstrating a perfect squat. "Gotta use the grain of your body, not fight the snow." Liam watched from a few feet away, leaning against his shovel, his throat tight. He watched his defensive, angry son openly engaging with the woman he had sworn to hate. He watched Olivia treat the boy not as a fragile victim, but as a capable equal. Later that afternoon, as the shadows began to stretch across the snow, Olivia was in the barn, pitching fresh hay into the stalls. The heavy wooden doors were cracked open to let the sunlight in. She heard a small shuffling sound. She turned, pitchfork in hand. Maya was standing in the center aisle. She was clutching the ragged blanket that usually belonged to her younger brother. The little girl looked at the massive draft horses, then looked up at Olivia. The manipulative, defiant child from the first week was gone. She just looked incredibly small. "My mom used to braid my hair before church," Maya whispered into the vast, dusty silence of the barn. Olivia carefully leaned the pitchfork against the stall. She didn't rush forward, knowing any sudden movement would spook the child. She sank down to sit on a bale of hay, patting the space next to her. "I'm not as good at it as your mother was," Olivia said softly. "But if you have a brush, I can try." Maya hesitated, then took a slow step forward. She walked over, climbed onto the hay bale, and handed Olivia a small plastic hairbrush she had been hiding behind her back. As Olivia began to gently untangle the matted blonde hair, Liam appeared in the doorway of the barn. He stopped dead in his tracks. The sight of his daughter sitting peacefully beside Olivia, leaning into her touch, struck him with the force of a physical blow. Olivia looked up and met his gaze over Maya's head. No words were exchanged. In the quiet, golden dust of the barn, a profound, undeniable tether formed between them. The ice hadn't just cracked. The thaw had finally, irreversibly begun. The fragile peace of the valley lasted precisely 5 days. The snowplows finally cleared the twisting mountain switchbacks, reconnecting the Thorne property to the rest of the world. And with the cleared roads came the consequence of Olivia's first week. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sky was an overcast, slate gray. Olivia and Liam were on the front porch, repairing a broken section of the wooden railing. Inside, the children were at the kitchen table, Leo actually helping Maya with her math homework, a miracle that Olivia had orchestrated through sheer, quiet expectation. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway shattered the calm. A sleek, black, state-issued SUV pulled up to the house. The doors opened, and 2 people stepped out. One was Deputy Miller, looking deeply uncomfortable. The other was a sharp-featured man in a wool overcoat carrying a thick leather briefcase. Mr. Harrison, the regional director of the placement agency. Olivia's posture instantly shifted. She set down her hammer, her spine straightening, the military precision returning to her stance. Liam stepped up beside her, his massive frame radiating an immediate, protective tension. Harrison didn't bother with pleasantries. He stopped at the base of the stairs, looking up at Olivia with cold, bureaucratic disdain. "Ms. Vance," Harrison said, his voice clipped. "Pack your bags. Your contract is terminated effective immediately." Liam's jaw locked. He stepped in front of Olivia, blocking Harrison's line of sight. "Excuse me? Mr. Thorne, I apologize for the disruption," Harrison said smoothly, adjusting his glasses. "But it has come to the agency's attention that Miss Vance lied on her application. She failed to disclose her background in high-risk tactical rescue. And more importantly, we have received multiple complaints from the town of Oakhaven regarding her aggressive and threatening behavior toward locals." "Tucker is a loudmouth who got what was coming to him," Liam growled, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "She didn't threaten him. She put him in his place." "Be that as it may," Harrison continued, unfazed. "She is entirely unsuitable for a domestic, nurturing environment. The state requires a caretaker of a certain psychological profile. A woman trained in crisis management who threatens citizens is a liability. Deputy Miller is here to ensure she vacates the premises without incident." We will dispatch a proper, state-approved nanny by Friday. No, the word wasn't shouted. It was delivered with a quiet, lethal finality. But it didn't come from Liam. It came from the screen door. Everyone turned. Leo stood on the porch, his face pale but his eyes blazing with a fierce, protective fire. Behind him, Maya was clutching his hand, and little Sam was peeking out from behind her legs. Leo walked past his father and stepped squarely between Olivia and the men at the bottom of the stairs. "She's not leaving," the 12-year-old said, his voice cracking slightly, but holding its ground. "The other ones you sent cried when Maya yelled. They let us eat garbage. They looked at my dad like he was a monster. Olivia doesn't. She knows how to fix the well. She makes us clean up our own messes." Harrison blinked, taken aback by the child's intervention. "Son, you don't understand?" "I understand that you want to take her away because she's not soft," Leo shouted, the tears finally springing to his eyes, born of desperation, not weakness. "We don't need soft. We need someone who doesn't run away when it gets cold." The silence that descended on the yard was absolute. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the immense weight of the boy's plea. Olivia stared at Leo's back, her heart shattering in her chest. She had spent 2 years building walls, refusing to let anyone in, punishing herself for the mountain. But standing here, looking at this broken boy defending her with everything he had, the walls crumbled into dust. Liam stepped forward, placing a heavy, grounding hand on his son's shoulder. He looked down at Mr. Harrison, his gray eyes dark and immovable like the mountain itself. "You heard the boy," Liam said, his voice a low rumble of absolute authority. "She's not leaving." "Mr. Thorne," Harrison warned, his tone hardening. "If you refuse this extraction, the agency will void your contract. You will receive no state assistance. The Family Services Board will put a flag on your file, and they will come looking to see if this environment is fit for children." "Let them come," Liam said softly. "Let them drive up here and try to take my kids, but they'll have to get through me. And they'll have to get through her." He glanced back at Olivia, the look in his eyes so raw, so filled with a sudden, desperate devotion. It took her breath away. Liam turned his attention back to the bureaucrat. "My wife is gone, Harrison. The state can't fix that. A nanny can't fix that. I am formally terminating the agency's services. Get off my property." Harrison stared at Liam, recognizing the unyielding granite in the man's posture. He looked at the deputy, who simply shook his head and took a step back toward the cruiser. With a tight, furious nod, Harrison turned on his heel. "You're making a catastrophic mistake, Thorne." "I'm finally waking up," Liam replied. The men got into their vehicles. The tires crunched over the gravel, the sound fading down the mountain road until the valley was silent once more. Liam let out a long, shuddering exhale. He looked down at Leo, giving his shoulder a firm squeeze. "Take your sister and brother inside. Finish the math." Leo looked up at Olivia, gave her a short, fierce nod, and herded the younger siblings back into the cabin. Liam and Olivia were left alone on the porch. The cold air hung between them, charged with the electricity of what had just happened. Liam turned to face her. The space between them felt incredibly small now. "You just threw away state funding," Olivia said quietly, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "You threw away your safety net." "I don't need a safety net," Liam said, taking a slow step toward her. He reached out, his rough, calloused fingers gently wrapping around her left hand, his thumb resting perfectly over her silvery scar. He didn't look at the scar. He looked directly into her eyes. "I need you." The breath caught in Olivia's throat. The admission stripped away the last remnants of her armor. "I don't know how to be a mother to them, Liam," she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time. "I only know how to survive." Liam stepped closer, closing the distance entirely. He reached up with his free hand, gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His touch was incredibly tender, a shocking contrast to the harshness of his life. "They don't need you to be their mother, Olivia," Liam murmured, leaning in, his forehead coming to rest gently against hers. "And I don't need you to be my savior. I just need you to stay. Stay with us, build the fire with us. Olivia closed her eyes, leaning into his warmth, feeling the steady, powerful rhythm of his pulse beneath her hand. The ghosts of the mountain would always be there, but they no longer owned the cabin. For the first time in 2 years, the cold had been locked out. "I'm staying," she whispered into the freezing air. "I'm not going anywhere." The quiet strength of Olivia and Liam reminds us that true healing doesn't come from erasing the past, but from finding someone willing to stand with you in the cold while you build a new fire. Grief is a heavy burden, but love, patience, and unyielding courage can thaw even the most frozen of hearts. If you were captivated by this slow-burn journey of survival, found family, and redemption in the harsh Bitterroot Valley, please like, share, and subscribe for more deeply grounded, emotional stories. Your support helps us bring more cinematic tales of resilience and romance to life.